Hello and welcome to chapter 15 of our HTML and CSS web development course. Now on chapter 15 we are going to talk about layouts. Now this chapter is one of the most important chapters to know when designing a website. Now this chapter is going to explain to us how to control the position of elements, how to create website layout, and how to design different size screens. In this chapter we are going to look at how to control where each element sits on a page and how to create attractive web pages and web layout. Attractive page layout. This involves learning about how designing for a screen can be different to designing for other mediums. We are going to explore different ways to position elements using normal flow, relative positioning, absolute positioning, and floats. We are also going to discover how various devices have different screen sizes and resolution, and how this affects the design process. We also talk about the difference between fixed width and liquid layout and how they are created. We are also going to find out how designers use grids to make their page designs look more professional. Now, key concepts in positioning elements. So we are going to talk about what? The building blocks. CSS treats each HTML element as if it is in its own box. We've explained this extensively. This box will either be a block level box or an inline box. So we all know what block level elements are and then what inline elements are. Block level boxes start on a new line and act as the main building blocks of any layout, while inline boxes flow between surrounding text. You can control how much space each box takes up by setting the width of the boxes. To separate boxes, you can use borders, margins, paddings, and background colors to what? Differentiate or to distinguish between different boxes. So some examples of block level elements, which is all the headings, let's say H1 to H6, all paragraphs, types of lists, okay, they are all what? Block level element, and they start on a new line. Whilst inline elements flow in between surrounding text, and examples include the image, the bold, the italic, the emph, okay, the strong, and what have you. Now, containing elements. If one block element sits inside another block level element, then the outer box is known as the containing or the parent element. It is common to group a number of elements together inside an element, inside other block level elements. For example, you might group together all of the elements that form the header of a website. So this includes the logo and the main navigation, which we have given examples, and then we've done it in our previous lessons. The element that contains this group of elements is then referred to as the containing element, because it is like the parent or the mother block element. A box may be nested inside several other block level elements. The containing element is always the direct parent of that element. I'm going to show you an example. Okay, you see the header. The header contains logo and the main navigation, and they are all in a box called the div. The main content of the page is in another, and the footer is also in another. So you have the main box, which contains the div, the main body, okay, and then within the body we have other divs, one for the header, another for the footer, even articles and other things, and aside and sidebars also have their own boxes. Other boxes that forms a parent of this group of boxes is what we call the containing element. Now, controlling the position of element also, we should know positioning schemes. Now, positioning schemes allow you to control the layout of a page, either normal flow, relative positioning, and absolute positioning. You specify the positioning scheme using the position property in CSS. You can also float elements using the float property. Now, normal flow. What is normal flow? Every block level element appears on a new line, causing each item to appear lower down the page than the previous one. Even if you specify the width of the boxes and there is space for two elements to sit side by side, let's say you indicate the width and the width will not span the whole line, there's no way two of them will sit on the same line. The other must drop because it is a block level element. They will not appear next to each other. This is the default behavior of the normal flow, which is the block level element. What about relative positioning? This moves an element from the position it would be in the normal flow, shifting it to the top, right, bottom, or left of where it would have been placed. This does not affect the position of surrounding elements. They stay in the position they would be in the normal flow. What about absolute positioning? This positions the element in relation to its containing element, which means its mother element. It is taken out of normal flow, meaning it does not affect the position of any surrounding element. Okay, or absolutely positioned elements move as users scroll up and down the page. To indicate where a box should be positioned, you may also need to box offset properties. You use the box offset properties to tell the browser how far from the top or bottom and left or right it should be placed. Fixed positioning. Now, when you are using fixed positioning, it is a form of absolute positioning that positions the elements in relation to the browser window as opposed to the containing element. Elements with fixed positioning do not affect the position of surrounding elements and do not move when the user scrolls up or down. Floating elements. Floating an element allows you to take that element out of the normal flow and position it to the far left or right of a containing box. The floated element becomes a block level element around which other elements or content can also flow. When you move any element from normal flow, boxes can overlap because you are now changing positionings, either relative or absolute, or fixed or floating. If it is not the normal flow, that means there could be possibility of overlap of boxes. Now, the z-index property allows you to control which box appears on top of which one. That's the z-index. Now, let's talk about the normal flow and give examples. We're going to use the position and give it a value of static. In a normal flow, each block level element sits on top of the next one, like we explained. Since this is the default way in which browsers treat HTML elements, you do not need a CSS property to indicate that that element should appear in a normal flow. The syntax is position, and you say static. In this case, you have not specified a width property for the heading element, so you are going to see that it's going to stretch the width of the entire browser window by default. The paragraphs are also going to be restricted to 450 pixels, while I'm going to show you that example. Now this is going to show you how the elements in normal flow start on a new line, even if they do not take up the full width of the browser window. All of the examples I'm going to show you that demonstrate positioning will use a similar HTML structure. Now this is the example I was trying to explain earlier. This is for the entire body. I will go to our text editor and then actually demonstrate this for everyone to see. So this is the body, which has a level 1 heading, and it has a paragraph as well. And then this is the CSS style. By giving it a width, okay, the entire body of 750 pixels, a font family, give it a color, and the block 1 heading has a color also, and a padding of 10 pixels, and the paragraph is going to be 450 pixels. It's going to stay just like you saw in the explanations. In the explanation here, that the paragraphs are restricted to 450. Okay, restricted to 450. So this was the example I was trying to explain. Let's go to our text editor and then write this code in and then see how it's going to display on our browser. In our text editor, I've pasted the HTML code, okay, which is the level 1 heading and then the paragraph. I'm going to save it, Ctrl S, and then go to my CSS, and then let me remove all these codes and then paste the styles I want to apply. The styles I want to apply to the body. So I'm actually going to save both the CSS and then the HTML as well, and I'll view in my browser the results. Now you can see the box around it, and then because it's a block level element, even though this has not covered the entire space, it has dropped down and it has given this a 450 pixels as my paragraph, okay, and it has given this a 750 pixels as well. So it is clear from the CSS. Let me minimize my CSS and my browser so it can be seen side by side. Let me do that quickly. So let me also minimize this, and then my browser. Now we saw that we gave the entire body a width of 750 pixels, font family of Arial, and the color, this is the color. So if you want to actually see it working, let me just give it a more brighter color. Let me save, let me refresh the browser. Okay, so you can actually see it working. Okay, now we are going to look at the relative positioning. Relative positioning moves an element in relation to where it would have been in the normal flow. For example, you can move it 10 pixels lower than it would have been in the normal flow, or 20% to the right from where it would have been in the normal flow. So it is relative. You can indicate that an element should be relatively positioned using the position property with a value of relative. You then use the offset property, either top or bottom, left or right, to indicate how far to move the element from where it would have been. So if the normal space is 10 pixels, you could actually use the relative and indicate the offset property and say 30. So it's going to move 30 pixels away from where it would have been. Now to move the box up or down, you can use either the top or the bottom property as well. Now to move it horizontally, you can use the left or the right properties. The values of the box offset property are usually given in pixels, percentages, or in ems. So we've explained pixels, we've explained percentages, and we've explained ems and what they mean in our previous videos. Now this is an example that is going to explain relative positioning. So let's go to our text editor to actually run this code to see how it's going to look like. So now in my text editor, I'm going to indicate the relative positioning I want. So I want the position to be relative, and it should be 10 pixels away from the top, because the normal flow would have been it be on the normal line. And then I also want it to move from the left 100 pixels away from the left. So I am now trying to move it relative to positioning. So I want to now position it horizontally, move it from where it used to be, okay, with 100 pixels away. So let me just save this and then refresh the browser. Now you can actually see that this is where it should have been in the normal flow, and then we have said it should move 100 pixels away from the left, that is away from where it should have been in the normal flow. That is relative positioning. Absolute positioning. Now when the position property is given a value of absolute, the box is taken out of normal flow and no longer affects the position of other elements on the page. They act like it is not there. The box offset property, top or bottom, left or right, specify where the element should appear in relation to its containing element. I'm going to show you an example, okay, of the heading, okay, that has been positioned at the top of the page and 500 pixels from its left edge. The width of the heading is set to 250 pixels wide. The width property has also been applied to the element in the example I'm going to show you to prevent the text from overlapping and becoming unreadable. By default, most browsers add a margin to the top of the element. That is why there is a gap between the top of the browser and the box containing the element. If you wanted to remove this margin, you could add the following code, which I'm going to show you, which is 0 pixels of margin or 0% of margin. So we can use the ems, the percentages, and the pixels. This is the example of the code we are going to use to explain absolute positioning. In this case, we are concentrating on our paragraph and our heading. So let's head straight to our text editor and browser to see how it's going to display. Now this is my text editor. Let me do away with the relative, and then let's check out how the absolute is going to look like. Let me save it, refresh my. Now this is the absolute positioning. This is the absolute positioning. Now you can see it has moved the heading, which we have positioned absolute, okay, and we have made a top 0 pixels, and it has moved 500, okay, from its original position, and it has a width of 250, whilst our paragraph is still maintaining it 450. So you see it has moved almost to the right. Let me maximize my browser. I'm going to say it almost away from the paragraph. Okay, almost away from the paragraph. So this is absolute positioning. Now fixed positioning. Okay, fixed positioning is a type of absolute positioning that requires the position property to have a value of fixed. It positions the element in relation to the browser window. Therefore, when a user scrolls down the page, it stays in the exact same place because it is fixed. It is a good idea to try this in your browser, which we are going to do, to actually see how it's going to render. To control where the fixed position box appears in relation to the browser, again the box offset properties are used. So in the example, we are going to see the heading has been positioned to the top left hand corner of the browser. Top left hand corner, top left of the browser. When the user scrolls down the page, the paragraphs disappear behind the heading. The paragraphs are going to disappear. The elements are in a normal flow and ignore the space that the element would have taken up. Therefore, the margin top property has been used to push the first element below where the fixed positioning element is sitting. This is the code that is going to explain exactly what we mean by fixed positioning. So let's try it out in our text editors and our web browsers. I'm going to do away with the absolute and then paste in the fixed. Let me remove this class name. Let me save, and then now refresh my browser. Now I'm going to see that it is fixed. Let me try and see if my scrolling will actually work, because I don't have a lot of enough content. So you see that now it is fixed, and the top margin, I told you usually browsers leave margin at the top. Now the top margin is now what? 0 pixels. Okay, it has moved a little from the left, 50 pixels away from the left, and there's a padding so that the edge of the box and the text will be clearly distinguished. Okay, there's no margin and the width of 100%, and there is a background color of that, so you can actually change the background color. Okay, after changing the background color, refresh, save it, and then refresh your web page. You're going to see it actually working. So let me just reverse to the old styles, resave it, and then check it out. Now you can see, yes, exactly what you want. You can see that the header or our heading is still fixed to the top of the window, whilst our paragraphs is now hiding. Let me change this. It's now hiding under it. So this is exactly what I want to do, but the paragraph has a top margin of 100 pixels, so you can actually see 100 pixels from the box. Okay, 100 pixels from the box. The next thing I'm going to look at is overlapping. Okay, overlapping. So let's go to our slides, check overlapping, and come back to our text editor. Overlapping element. I'm going to use the Z index property, right? When you use relative, fixed, or absolute positioning, boxes can overlap. If boxes do overlap, the elements that appear later in the HTML code sit on top of those that are earlier in the page. So the one that will come later will definitely come and override the previous or the earlier element. So when you have 2 or 3 elements, and then the first one will always be the one at the bottom, whilst the second will be on the first, and then the last one will be on top of the first 2. If you want to control which element should sit on top, you can use the z-index property to do that. Its value is a number, and the higher the number, the closer that element is to the front. For example, an element with a z-index of 10 will appear over the top of one with a z-index of 5. Paragraphs are relatively positioned. By default, they would appear over the top of the heading as the user scrolls down the page. To ensure that the element stays on top, we use the z-index property on the rule of the element. The z-index is sometimes referred to as the stacking context. If you are familiar with desktop publishing packages, like if you're familiar with Publisher, and then you are designing your boxes, one will tend to overlap the other. So you will have to know how to do your floating such that each one or one will bring to the you bring one in front of the other, or you send one to the back. You have to do your arrangement using the z-index property. Now this is an example I want to use to explain. Now if you check this particular example, there's a header, a heading which is fixed, no space on top of it, margin is 0, padding is 0, just like we did in the earlier example, but it has a z-index of 10, and then the paragraph is relative, 70% pixels from the top and 70 from the left. Okay, let me show you how this is going to look in our browser before going to floating elements. And this is my text editor. I'm going to clear this and replace it with the z-index. I'll save it and then I'll refresh my browser to see. Now this is, if you check from our CSS code, for the paragraph, we say the paragraph should be relative, 70 pixels away from the top, and then 70 from the left as well. Whilst the heading should be fixed, it should be the top, okay, it should be 0 pixels away from the top. You shouldn't leave any space. By default, the margin should be 0, left should be 0. That means that it is attached to the window. You can clearly see it here, you see, so there's no space. Okay, so it has been what, it is 0 pixels from the left. That means it should be attached to the left. Margin to is 0, padding is 10. So padding is just the space from the edge of the box to the text, and a z-index of 10. So when any element has a z-index of 11, it should come definitely on top of our heading. But if it has less, then it means it should come under our heading. So that's what z-index does. Let's talk about float. Now, floating elements. The float property allows you to take an element in normal flow and place it as far to the left or right of the containing element as possible. Anything else that sits inside the containing element will flow around the element that is floated. When you use the float property, you should also use the width property to indicate how wide the floated element should be. If you do not, results can be inconsistent, but the box is likely to take up the full width of the containing element. In the example I'm going to show you, A block quote element is used to hold a quotation. Its containing element is the body. The block quote element is now floated to the right, and the paragraphs that follow the quote flow around the floated what element. Now that's the example you see. You see the block quote here, and then the paragraph here, and this is the CSS for the block quote. It has been flowed to the right with a width of 275 pixels, font size 130%, and the other styling, margin 0 0, that means 0 to the top, 0 to the right, 10 to the bottom, and then 10 to the left. It has a padding, okay, and then a border top also 1 pixel, and she's solid, and the others. So let's check out float in our text editor and browser. Now I've pasted the code, the HTML code we saw in our slide. So you see a heading, a block quote, and a paragraph. So I'm going to the CSS area and then clear this, and then use the new settings for the block quote. Okay, so let me save it and see how it's going to appear. Now exactly how we wanted it, because look at the code, float to the right, so it means it has come to the right. Okay, width of 275, that's a width of 275. It has a font size of 130. If you check, the font size are bigger than this. Okay, this is 100%, so this is 130, slightly bigger. It has Georgia, it is italic, so everything we actually wanted is there. We have a border on the top. Okay, so that's the box, and there's a border at the top. The border also has a color. Okay, the border also has a color. Now let's go to our slides and then continue with the notes. Now let's talk about using float to place elements side by side. Using float, we just learned how to use float, but in this case we are floating to the right, but in this case we want to put it side by side. So a lot of layout place boxes next to each other. The float property is commonly used to achieve this. When elements are floated, the height of the boxes can affect where the following element sits. In the example I'm going to show you, you will see 6 paragraphs. Each of the 6 has a width and a float property set. The 4th paragraph does not go across left hand edge of the page as one might expect. Rather, it sits right under the 3rd paragraph. The reason for this is that the 4th paragraph has space to start under the 3rd paragraph, but it cannot go any further to the left because the 2nd paragraph is in the way. Setting the height of the paragraphs to be the same height as the tallest paragraph will solve this issue, but it is rarely suited to real-world designs where the amount of text in a paragraph or column may vary. It is more common to use the clear property to solve this issue. Now, using float, okay, to place elements side by side. This is the code, okay, I want us to use to explain that. We are also going to see the entire body having a width of 750, just like we've done, and a float, this floating to the left. This is just like the example we used earlier. Let's just move on. Clearing floats. The clear property allows you to say that no element within the same containing element should what? Touch the left or the right hand side of the box. It can take the following values: left, it can take right, it can take both, it can take none. When you use the left hand side of the box should not touch any other element appearing in the same containing element. If you use the right hand side of the box will not touch element appearing in the same containing element. Now if you use both, it simply means neither the left nor the right hand side of the box will touch element appearing in the same containing element. And if you use none element can touch either side. In the example, the fourth paragraph has a class called clear. The CSS rule for this class uses the clear property to indicate that nothing should touch the left hand side of it. The fourth paragraph is therefore moved further down the page so no other element touches its left hand side. Now this is an example. This is the one that has a class of clear. Okay, and look at the code. It says clear left. So clear simply means it is going to move it. Okay, it's going to move it completely so that none of the sides is going to what? Is going to touch it. Parent of floated elements. This is a problem and then we are going to explain using the solutions. Parent of floated elements. If a containing element only contains floated element, some browsers will treat it as a 0-pixel store. I'm going to show you the example. As you can see the example HTML and CSS here. The 1-pixel border, okay, which is this 1-pixel border assigned to the containing element has collapsed, so the box looks like a 2-pixel line. Traditionally, developers got around this problem by adding an extra element after the last floated box. A CSS rule would be applied to this additional element, setting the clear property to have a value of both. But this meant that an extra element is supposed to be added to the HTML just to fix the height of the containing element. More recently, developers have opted for a purely CSS based solution because it means that there is no need to add any extra elements, okay, to the HTML page after the floated element. So there's no need to do the addition of what increasing the height of the containing element and what have you. So a pure CSS solution has two CSS rules to the containing element. One, the overflow property is given a value auto, and then the width property is set to 100. Now overflow is what? Auto, and the width is what? Is 100. Let me show you this example to explain all what I've spoken about. So I just posted the HTML element as we have it within the div, and then also let me come to the CSS area and then paste the overflow auto to explain how to put it within the box. Okay, so I save that one as well. I come to my page and I refresh. Now this what happens when you have such a challenge. So border, you give the border 1 pixel and solid and give it a color, and now overflow you do it auto. So assuming the text were many, it will still not go outside the box, and give it a width of 100. That's the div. The next thing is creating multi-column layout with float. Creating multi-column layout with float. Many web pages use multi-columns in their design. This is achieved by using an element or the anchor element to represent each column. The following three CSS properties are used to position the columns next to each other: width, float, and margin. when you use the width, it sets the width of the columns, and the float positions the columns next to each other, whilst the margins create a gap between the columns. A 2-column layout like the one I'm going to show you would need 2 elements, one for the main content of the page and one for the sidebar. Inside each of the element there can be headings, paragraphs, images, and even other elements. Now this is how to create multi-column layout with float. I'm going to show you this in our text editor and on our browser. Let's go quickly to our text editor. Now in the HTML, I have 2 columns. So this has column 1 of 2 and column 2 of 2. Let me save this and go to the CSS and see column 1 of 2. We say it should float to the left with a width of 620 and a margin of 10 pixels. So we told you the margin is to put gaps between each of the boxes or each of the columns. And this also has a margin of 10 with a width of 300 and a float also to the left. So let's also save this and then refresh our browser. Okay, so this is what is happening. Let me maximize my page. So this is the first div and then second div. Okay, this is creating columns, 2 columns table. Let me try with 3 columns. Now the 2 columns will be side by side. Okay, they will float side by side. Let me try and create a 3 column using this code. Now I have 3 columns, 3 different divs added. So they are here. The first one has a class of column 1 of 3, second one has column 2 of 3, and the third one has column 3 of 3. We have a class of 2 of 2 as well. So let me try and then let me just take the 2 of 2 out. This is coming from our previous example, and then save it. Come to my CSS and write a rule to work for column 1 of 2, 1 of 3, 2 of 3, and 3 of 3 by using comma and applying the same rule to all of them. I save this one as well. So I want 3 columns to appear side by side. Okay, all should appear side by side. Now I'm seeing only 2 appearing side by side. This is 1 column, another column. Let me try and now add the 2 of 2. Add 2 of 2 here. Let me just include a 2 of 2, which are the, let me save it and let me refresh the page again. Now I can see, so I can see 3 columns, 1 column here, 1 column there, 1 column there. It's unfortunate that I don't have a lot of text in my brackets, in my paragraphs, so you don't actually see it, but you can actually see this is 1 column, the middle column, and then the end column. So we were creating 3 columns. The first one was 2 columns. Screen sizes. Different visitors to your website will have different size screens that show different amounts of information. So your design needs to be able to work on a range of different size screens. When designing for print, you always know the size of the piece of paper that your design will be printed on. When it comes to designing for the web, you are faced with a unique challenge that different users will have different size screens. Since computers have been sold to the public, the size of screens have been steadily increasing. This means that some people viewing your site might have 30-inch monitors, while others have 27 or more inch monitors. The size of a user screen affects how big they can open their windows and how much of the page they will see. There are also an increasing number of handheld devices, mobile devices, as in mobile phones and tablets, that have smaller screens. Screen resolution. Resolution refers to the number of dots a screen shows per inch. Some devices have a higher resolution than desktop computers, and most operating systems allow users to adjust the resolution of their screens. Most computers will allow owners to adjust the resolution of the display or the number of pixels that are shown on the screen. For example, I'm going to show you options to change your screen size from 720 by 480 pixels up to 1280 by 800. This can easily be done in Windows by right clicking and going to page resolution. You can easily change your resolution over there. It is interesting to note that the higher the resolution, the smaller the text. Many mobile devices have screens that are higher resolution than their desktop counterparts. Now, page sizes. Because screen sizes and display resolutions vary so much, web designers often try to create pages of around 960 pixels to 1000 pixels wide. Judging the height that people are likely to see on the screen without scrolling down the page is more harder. For several years, designers assumed that users would see the top 570 to 600 pixels of the page without having to scroll, and some try to fit all their key messages in that 570 to 600 pixels, because it is likely that someone might not scroll up to see the other content of the page. As screen sizes have increased and handheld devices have become more popular, the area users will see is far more variable. The area of the page that users would see without scrolling was often referred to as above the fold. It is now recognized that if someone is interested in the content of the page, they are likely to scroll down to see more. Having said that, usability studies have also shown that visitors can judge a page in under a second, so it is still important to let new visitors know that the site is relevant to them and their interest. Make sure the content is as rich as possible. As a result, many designers still try to let the user know what the site is about within the top 570 to 600 pixels, as well as hint at more content below this point. Fixed width layout. Fixed width layout designs do not change size as the user increases or decreases the size of their browser window. Measurements tend to be given in pixels. Now I'm going to give you advantages of using a fixed width and then the disadvantage of using same. The advantages: 1. Pixel values are accurate at controlling size and positioning of elements. The designer also has far greater control over the appearance and position of items on the page than with liquid layout. We will come to liquid layout later. You can also control the length of lines of text regardless of the size of the user's window. And the last is the size of an image will always remain the same relative to the rest of the page, because you are using what? You are using fixed layout. The disadvantage: you can end up with big gaps around the edge of your page. If the user screen is a much higher resolution than the designer's screen, the page can look smaller and text can be harder to read. That we explained it when we were explaining the layout, both relative and we're explaining the positioning. If a user increases font sizes, text might not fit into the allotted spaces, especially the screen devices, these mobile devices. When you increase the font sizes or you try to zoom in, they will not fit in the spaces. The design works best on devices that have a size or resolution similar to that of the desktop. Yes, you get the best experience and the best feeling when you have the same type of device that the designer used in creating. The page will often take up more vertical space than a liquid layout with the same content. That's for what? For fixed layout. Now let's talk about liquid layout. What is liquid layout? Liquid layout designs stretch and contract as their user increases or decreases the size of their browser window. They tend to use percentages. Now, advantages of liquid layout. Pages expand to fill the entire browser window, so there are no spaces around the page on a large screen. So this solves one of the disadvantages of the fixed. If the user has a small window, the page can contract to fit in without the user having to scroll to the side. The design is tolerant of users setting font sizes larger than the designer's intended size. You see, the advantages of the liquid layout has answered all the disadvantages or some disadvantages of the fixed layout. Some of the disadvantages is if you do not control the width of sections of the page, then the design can look very different than you intended. If the user has a wide window, lines of text can become very long, which makes them harder to read. If the user has a very narrow window, words may be squashed and you can end up with few words on each line. And if a fixed width item like an image is in a box that is too small to hold it, the image can overflow over the text. Now, a fixed width layout. To create a fixed width layout, the width of the main boxes on a page will usually be specified in pixels. I'm going to show you example of several elements, each of which uses an ID or class attribute to indicate its purpose on the page. The results of both the fixed and liquid layout look similar. To get a real feel of them, you need to view them in your browser and see how they react when you adjust the size of the browser window. The fixed width layout will stay the same width no matter what size the browser window is, whereas the liquid layout will stretch to fill the screen. The HTML is the same for both the fixed layout, and then the liquid layout. Now, this is one example we are supposed to look at to explain the layout. So we are going straight into our text editor to do this practice. Alright, so I have a div that has the header, the logo, and the nav. So this is the nav bar, and I also have another div. I have a lot of divs here in columns, and I have the footer. As well. So let me save this and then go to the CSS and set my rules with the new set of code. Let me save this as well, and now refresh my browser. Now this is what I'm going to see. Okay, so you see this portion is the header, which contains the logo together with a nav bar. There's one div here, another div, another div, another div. So 3 columns, and then there's a footer. Okay, and this is 960. So let me try and reduce the window sizes for you to see. So you can see this is fixed, right? The rule for the body element is used to fix the width of the page at 960 pixels, and it is centered by setting the left and the right margins to auto. Okay, the main boxes on the page have a margin of 10 pixels to create a gap between them. We are still on the explanation of the practice we just did in our browser. The navigation. Okay, the feature and the footer panels stretch to the width of the containing element, which is the 960. Okay, so we do not need to specify a width for them. The 3 columns are each 300 pixels and use the float property, which allows them to sit next to each other. Sometimes an extra HTML element is used to contain the page rather than fixing the width of the body. This allows the background of the browser window to have a different color than the background of the content. The liquid layout. The liquid layout uses percentages to specify the width of each box so that the design will stretch to fit the size of the screen. When trying this in your browser, remember to make the browser window smaller and larger to see how it stretches. So this is an example of the liquid. So we are going to actually do this in our browser as well, okay, for us to see how this one is also going to render this particular liquid layout. Now the same HTML element, but I'm going to change the CSS and now use the liquid, and that we told you the liquid also uses the percentages instead of the pixels. So I'm going to save this. Okay, then I'll refresh my browser. You see, you usually see this is rather stretching the more than that of the fixed we use. That of the fixed we use was stated at 960 pixels and it stayed there. It wasn't increasing at all. But look at this one. This one has stretched and it has spanned from this end to this place. The first one was like half of my screen. So let me try and resize this one. So whilst I resize it, I want to see how my columns and this thing is going to, you see, it's going to conform. It contracts based on the size of the window, but in the fix it wasn't contracting this way. It was at one place, it was fixed. Okay, so this one can be, let's say, a mobile view, this one can be, let's say, tablet, and then this can be PC or desktop or any other device. So as a designer, you will have to decide on which one you want. Okay, which of the layout style will you want? Will you want a fixed or you want the liquid? Now you realize that this is a rule on the body element, okay, to set the weight of the page to 90%. Okay, to 90%. So instead of using 960 pixels, okay, you can use percentages. When you use percentages, depending on the screen of the user, it will span to that 90% of that screen. So there is a small gap between the left and the right hand sides of the browser window. So that one can take, let's say, 5% to make up the 100%. So you have 90% and then 5, let's say, on the left and then 5 on the right hand side. The 3 columns are all given a margin of 1% and a width of 31.3%. This adds up to 99.9% of the width of the main containing element, which is the body. So some browsers might not perfectly align the right hand side and the third column with other elements on the page. The div elements that hold the navigation feature, the feature and the footer will stretch to fill the width of the containing body element. They are given a 1% margin to help them align with the columns so that they don't touch each other or overlap. If you imagine the browser window to be very wide or very narrow, you will see how lines of text could become very long or very short. You see, I was reducing the size of my browser window for you to see how it actually pans out. Okay, this is where the minimum width and the maximum width properties help create boundaries within which the layout can stretch. Okay, we did the minimum width and the maximum width in our previous lessons. Now, layout grids. Composition in any visual form or in any visual art, such as painting or design or photography, is the placement or arrangement of visual elements, how they are organized on a page. Many designers use a grid structure to help them position items on a page, and the same is true for web designers. Grids set consistent proportions and spaces between items, which helps to create a professional looking design. If you flick back through some of the slides, you will see that we have constructed some of our pages according to grid. Look at the way we were dividing our columns, and then even the layout we just looked at. It is possible to create many different layouts using this one versatile grid. While a grid might seem like a restriction, in actual fact it is not. One, it creates a continuity between different pages which may use different designs. It helps users predict where to find information on various pages. It makes it easier to add new content to the site in a consistent way, and it helps people collaborate on the design of the website in a consistent way as well. Now, there are frameworks, CSS frameworks, okay, and their aim is to make your life easier by providing the code for common tasks, such as creating layout grids. There are frameworks that do that. Styling your forms, I showed you some of them, right? I told you to get the web developer toolbar. I told you to, when you are doing forms, also get ideas from formalize.me. Creating printer friendly versions of pages and so on. You can include a CSS framework code in your project rather than writing the code from scratch yourself. The advantages of this is it saves you from repeatedly writing code for the same task. And another advantage is that they will have been tested across different browsers. So they are codes that are tried and tested. It's not you are now going to get code, try it on this browser, try it on other browsers, and then now you'll be getting bugs on other browsers. Now you go through a whole process of debugging as well. What are some of the disadvantages? They often require that you use class names in your HTML code that only control the presentation of the page. And another disadvantage is that in order to satisfy a wide variety of needs, they often contain more code than you need to for your particular web page. Let's say if you are running a very small site and you are using their framework, because they are there to serve a very larger a proportion of the public, you turn up writing a lot of code. Okay, now introducing the 960.js CSS framework. One of the most popular uses of CSS frameworks is in creating grids to layout. There are several grid frameworks out there, but the one we'll be looking at over some of our pages now is the 960 grid system. It's available at www.960.gs, and the GS can be grid system. Now this provides a style sheet that you can include in your HTML page. Once our page links to this style sheet, you can provide the appropriate classes to your HTML code and it will create multiple color layouts for you. The 960.js website also provides templates you can download to help design your pages using a 12-column grid. I mean, they're going to give you 12 columns. You are going to decide whether to put 4 and 4 to get 3 columns, or you do individual to get 12 columns, or you do 3 so you get 4 columns out of 3 by joining 3 grids together, 3 together, 3 together. It depends on how you want to. You can also decide to do 6 and then 6 blocks and then 6 blocks. Now to create a 12-column grid, an element that contains the entire page is given a class attribute whose value is container 12, for instance. This sets the content of the page to 960 pixels wide and indicates that we are using a 12-column grid. There are different classes for blocks that take up 1, 2, 3, 4 and up to 12 columns of the grid. Each block uses class names such as grid 3, grid 4 and so on through to grid 12. These columns all float to the left and there is a 10 pixel margin to the left and then to the right of each of them. There are several other grid-based CSS frameworks available online. Another place you can get is blueprintcss.org and lessframework.com and developer.yahoo.com/u/grids, as you can see it in the highlighted part of this slide. Now this brings us to the end of our chapter 15. See you in chapter 16. Bye bye.